You are listening to Sexploration with Monica. And today I am very excited because, Keenan, you have your own podcast. And I mean, it's true, we have very different approaches to talking about sexuality, especially with young adults in educational settings. But we're sort of on the same team. And I'm really excited to share your work with the Sexploration audience. And I'm really excited to hear and tell your story. So, welcome to Sexploration with Monica Keenan.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a very different kind of show.
Yeah.
From
Well,
what
you
I
know, I
normally do.
try to make it a little bit edgy just because, like, that's where sometimes the lines get blurred, and that's why you need to be even more conscious. Because when you're dealing with things that are more edgy, you have to have more intention and more consciousness. Like, you have to not be doing drugs and alcohol when you're doing a scene or something like that. So, I know that in your work as an educator, that's some of the things that you really talk about. And you're working with people with disabilities in an educational setting. And so, let's talk about some of the complexities involved in your work as an educator.
Yeah, education is interesting. I have a checkered history with it. I definitely did not see myself becoming a teacher. If you had asked me that as a kid, definitely would bottom of the list. But so I was credentialed in May of 2024. So just this last few months, I got credentialed, and I have my credential in special education, specifically teacher for the visually impaired TVI.
Mm,
So I teach blind and low vision students, but that's sort of like a newer development.
yeah.
My background in education begins in 2017 after leaving a job working in entertainment, and I called a buddy of mine up, and I said, I just lost my last job. The contractor decided not to pay me, so
Mm,
I was owed basically like 5 grand in back pay. And really there was like a lot of other pay that I was owed. There was 1,600 from another guy, and then a lot of other money that was kind of on the table that kind of got swept off the table. And I left that job because that guy was actually one of the guys I was working for was a an enabler of a lot of things.
mm,
And so I got out of that gig, called my buddy up, and you're not going to name names because he might feel uncomfortable, but I called him up. I said, I'm looking for a gig, and I'm willing to do anything. And he said, well, we need substitute teachers. So I started as a sub, and I worked as a sub for 2017, 2018. Worked in a lot of the high school settings, and a lot of the high school sub jobs are really difficult because, for starters, you're working with high school kids. They're just difficult in general. Um,
Well,
and
when they have a disability, then I can imagine, there's a lot more things at play. Both, some of them, their parents are involved. I mean, there's just a lot of complexities there.
Well, that actually came a little bit after. So I started subbing with the mainstream in 17, 18, and I had put in a whole year subbing with the mainstream. And that's kind of the gauntlet. Most subs don't last a year, they kind of just burn out and quit.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
I really needed the cash. I was going back to school after graduating with my bachelor's.
Mm.
I had gotten my degree in journalism. A lot of things didn't work out. Nothing had landed. Just about every like bad timing, bad luck thing that could happen had happened.
Mm.
And I was just like, all right, I'm going to just pivot and develop skills. And I just need a holdover job. And that holdover job was, again, subbing, but it became full time because I did a position.
But you're very passionate about helping people with vision difficulties.
Yeah, I'm just to round out the last bit of the story
Sure.
because I know I'm going off on a tangent. I had done the mainstream stuff subbing, And then I got offered a long-term sub position, and everyone was like, "Oh, don't take that. You don't want it. You don't want one of those gigs." And it was as a paraprofessional for a program called Trace that I've had a lot of experience working with.
Right.
Trace is a program that's throughout the state of California, post-secondary education. Post-secondary ed, we call it PSE. Post-secondary ed is education that happens after high school. You work with special need kids who did not qualify for the California diploma. There's a lot of controversy around diplomas. They're trying to get rid of the diploma in the state of California,
Mm.
which is a mistake,
Hmm.
because it hurts everyone.
Mm.
Students who don't have a diploma can still benefit from being the certificate track, which is what my students came from. And so I went into that and I was told, "Oh, you don't want this gig. You don't want to do this. They're hard to work with. There's all kinds of difficulties, blah, blah, blah." And I went into it and it really clicked and gelled for me. You know, myself always being table scraps, it kind of clicked for me. And so like I kind of clicked with that mindset and was able to do the work. I had students, throw up on my clothes. I had students, wearing adult diapers.
Mm.
I've changed.
Yeah, I'm sure it's really hard.
I've changed more diapers. I've changed more diapers than my friends who have two kids.
Sure.
So, done a lot of stuff like that. A lot of dirty work.
Sure.
So that stuff doesn't bug me.
Sure.
I've taught Special Olympics. I've taught kids to walk. I had a kid who spent 19 years in a wheelchair, taught him how to walk. I've taught Special Olympics. I've taught kids to swim. I've taught kids to use a spoon and feed themselves. A lot of like very low functioning
Really
stuff.
important things to learn how to do as a young person. I mean, of course, we're so privileged as, people who, have been able bodied for most of our lives. But, there are things that you have to relearn when you become disabled. And then there's, things, people who are born blind and what challenges they face.
Yeah, and so working with the BVI community, the blind visually impaired community, and by the way, we're down the street from the Lighthouse for the Blind, so San Francisco
Here
Lighthouse.
at the Edge Studios. Yes,
Right.
we're right down the corner.
So I've worked with a couple of the folks over at California School for the Blind, and just done a lot of stuff. That all came about in 2020 and then really carried through all the way to 2024 when I graduated from my program at SF State. Took the master's exam this last October 5th. Still waiting on the results. They're not going to get us back until probably after Thanksgiving. But yeah, I mean, I'm fresh out of the program, but I've been in education 8 years. But I've been teaching a lot of other things. I've taught art. I'm an artist, been an artist for 27 years. I've taught art for like close to 10, maybe 15
Yeah,
years.
visual art. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've also been a musician for 17 years and I've taught music. I'm a writer. I've been a writer for like 20 odd years. I got my degree in journalism. So I am like actually a somewhat formally trained writer. And I've been a writing coach as well. So a lot of like tutoring and then now teaching. And that's that. I don't want to go off too much on that, but
Sure.
what do you want to ask me? What do you want to?
Yeah. So the things that I'm interested in discussing, people with disabilities, of course, everyone has sexuality from birth until death. And I can imagine, that there are, things. Well, okay. So one of kind of my jams in Sexploration with Monika is like there are body parts that may not serve you anymore, so you have to find a new body part for pleasure. And I always talked about like, oh yeah, you can have an orgasm with your earlobe. So like if you're a paraplegic, you can retrain your body so that your pleasure organ is your earlobe, and you can move around just by training sensitive areas. And there's dominatrixes or sex coaches that can help you gain these skills. And everyone can have pleasure even if they're disabled. And so I'm trying to learn about and talk about, what people who are disabled, what they can learn and what they have to and need to learn as disabled people.
So special education is kind of complicated because
Well, and yeah, you're not focusing so much on sexuality.
no, but you do have to talk about it with them because from the biological standpoint, they go through puberty.
Mm-hmm.
And then from just like the social standpoint, there's so many problems if you don't talk to them about it. And those problems have more to do with emotional regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the current sex ed environment does not appropriately attend to the needs of the young men who, as a result of a lack of real mentoring, I think that young men, and again, like I don't know, I guess like gender and sex is like, I don't know, whatever, fluid or some shit like that. But
Well,
like,
it can be a minefield. And of course, if you have more testosterone, you're certainly going to be more
masculine
armed and ready. I mean, everyone has testosterone, not just men.
women, right?
But women do too. But, of course, everything is a spectrum.
Right. So what I'm trying to do without getting too pedantic is
Sure.
like acknowledging anyway, so acknowledging that there's differences.
Sure.
With the young men though, in particular, what I see is that there isn't a conversation designed to address what is latent in a lot of young men, which is their anger and their aggression. And I think that the number one thing that I would say to somebody about that is, if you've ever been in an argument with someone and like they're really pissing you the fuck off, like if you're just really pissed off,
Sure.
going up to that person who's pissed off and saying you're angry does not help. It does not.
It doesn't generally solve the situation.
No, but the constant thing that's reinforced to a lot of young men is you're angry, and it's like that is the
Doesn't help.
no, it not only makes them more angry in the situation and more volatile, and if that's the thing you're trying to avoid, you just made it worse, but it sticks with them for the rest of their life because they're always told you're angry, you're this, you're that.
Oh.
And then what ends up happening is whenever they don't get what they want, and sex isn't about getting what you want, but when you don't understand it, and for a number of reasons, whether you don't understand it because you're young and you're learning, or you're intellectually impaired,
Sure.
and you don't understand it,
Sure.
when you don't get what you want, you get angry. And this is the case with everybody. This is how infants work. Infants, they
Sure.
cry when they don't get what they want. And people say, well, it's an infantile response. It's like, that's not helping. So when they're angry, the worst thing I've ever seen is people saying you're angry. It's like, okay, don't do that. The best thing you can do in that situation is instead empathize with the anger and say, what did they say to you? Oh, they said that to you? I can't believe they treated you that way.
Sure.
And you're
empathizing and then saying, oh, well, here's maybe a better solution.
Sort of, it's more of a mirroring
kind
process.
Of a pivot.
It is because, okay, if we're playing a game of racquetball, part of what makes the game so, or just any ball sport really, is keeping the ball in the air and the momentum going.
Right. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
And so now, if you don't have the skill to reflect the object that's been thrown at you at the same speed back, you not only can't play the game, but like you're just stuck on the sideline. Now, the real mastery is a ball's thrown at you. You can not only catch it and throw it back at the same speed, but you can change the angle and spin on the ball. And that's where that redirection comes from. And so the first step is matching their anger not with your own anger, but your own outrage.
Oh,
So,
like, I can't believe they did that to you. I'm so sorry.
well, yeah, like that's ridiculous, and tell me more about it.
Got it.
The ironic thing is, this is what police do when they're trying to get you to
Calm down.
to confess to doing.
Oh, really? Oh, psyche police moves. Whoa.
Well, no. They do this because they are trying to get you to speak.
Right.
And so they're leveraging it again. And the reason why I mention this is because they're like a police officer will use this technique to leverage your willingness to speak against you so that they can incriminate you.
Oh.
When you are working with the student, you are using this technique to leverage them into speaking so you can build trust and rapport with them. And then you don't break the trust barrier.
Right.
Because instead of using this to, aha, now I got you, I put you in handcuffs,
Yeah.
which is the mindset that people use, the answer is, hey man, I know you're fucking pissed off, but like, just chill out and go do this other thing.
Right.
And so the thing,
Redirection.
yes, but to actually get that, you have to match their anger with your own level of outrage, and then you like, that's ridiculous, and you reduce it to the absurd. You make it hyperbolic.
Right.
I can't believe this. I can't believe that. And then they start telling you more and more. Then you can actually unpack the semantics of that specific situation and understand the specific details of what happened. Then they've told you everything that's happened, and they feel like they've kind of vomited out the anger.
Sure. So it's cathartic for them.
Right. And
Right.
that is the thing that isn't done. And if that's not done, it escalates the aggression. The kid becomes more aggressive. They internalize the fact that they're aggressive. They always respond aggressively. The second somebody says you're being angry, they get even more explosive about it.
Right.
And that is the thing that's not happening. And a lot of what happens in young men is addressing their aggression as it escalates as they go through puberty. And so if you can't have that conversation with them, they're going to continue getting angry. And the best example I can give you is, we just had an election cycle, and news is driven by anger. The election cycle was just an angry news cycle over and over. And so, like, if you want to break out of that paradigm, you have to understand how it is you respond to anger is just as much of a problem as the anger itself. And so that's
yeah, that's a kind of wisdom, isn't it?
Yeah. And so, like, myself being a kid, I used to get into fights. I got arrested when I was 12 for getting into fights, and then my whole life I was labeled as angry, and then people are like, you're angry, and it's like, ah. And
It's not making you less angry.
no, and it took me actually a long time to get through the fact, and people still say to me, Keenan, you're angry, and I have to remind myself, like, ah. But it's a process that you go through for the rest of your life. And then if you learn that you're going through that, you develop other mediated tasks. Like, a lot of my anger has dissipated because the other thing is that people look at anger as if it's a negative emotion, and it's a neutral emotion. Anger, when it becomes negative, becomes hatred. Anger, when it's positive, becomes passion.
Right.
And so if you've ever felt like someone has tried to, like, dehumanize you in some way, like you talk about people abusing,
Sure.
there's a voice inside of you that's angry that says you shouldn't let someone treat you like that.
Right.
And that's an innate voice in yourself that's within your mind telling you you're worth more than how it is you're being treated. So that's an example where anger is actually very positive and can actually motivate you to drive yourself out of a negative situation. So I think that, like, young men are told that they're angry. Their anger is not redirected. And then people who are addressing them are not really aware of the fact that anger is neutral. They don't understand the nature of it. They're afraid of anger. And then what happens is the young men, because they're aware that the person is innately afraid of their anger, they kind of latch onto that fear response. And then that's where that anger becomes a tool for terrorizing people. And in a sense, people don't realize that you've kind of trained this person that the only way they can get what they want is by terrorizing others with their anger. And I think that a lot of that, like, it's not necessarily sex education per se, but it's an emotional awareness that's linked to sex education because it comes from testosterone. It happens at the same time in high school as they become aware of sex and
Sure.
and how it impacts them. And so to me, sex education isn't just like the biology or the cultural aspect or the social aspect. It's the self-regulating emotional aspect. And that's the stuff that also relates to how you generate your own emotional self-concept. Because if you have all that anger, you're going to look bad on yourself. And then you're not going to present yourself well to other people. And then that creates another cycle. And so it's many factors. And so I really think that sex education in itself needs not necessarily to be more comprehensive, but it needs to be paired with a form of emotional awareness education that's timed to really address that. And I think that that's why you see a lot of men remaining in an adolescent dreamlike phase because they don't have the means to channel it. They don't have the proper physical outlets.
Mm.
They don't have creative outlets. And then they're very like unassuming in their life. They don't have any aspirations or any goals, any sense of striving. And then with that lack of vigor, they kind of collapse into themselves, and then they gain these negative behaviors that are very exploitive and predatory, because there's the aggressive behaviors that are very obvious that people can kind of outwardly perceive.
See.
Right. But then there's the more pernicious behaviors that are way more subtle, and you can see that stuff manifesting early on as well. And then that's like the manipulative behavior, and that's the really insidious shit. And I see that happening as well because the outlet isn't correct, but the need is still present. And because the need is still present, they're going to find another way to get it.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's another way where you're creating abusers. And so everybody wants to talk about the angry person because they're the loud, noisy person, and they're the easiest to understand.
Right.
But that other aspect of manipulation comes in. And all this really starts to emerge in high school around 14, 15, 16, 17,
Mm-hmm.
in that age range. And I don't think that people are really willing to call the behavior on what it is,
Mm-hmm.
because then you have to be confrontational with the student, you have to be confrontational with the student's family.
Mm-hmm.
And, districts are risk adverse,
Sure.
and they are because effectively districts operate as businesses, and they should, because they have to be fiscally responsible. But at the same time, if you're too risk adverse, you create risk by trying to avoid. And so you can only do so much avoiding before you have to pay the bill. And then by the time you do so, it's accumulated interest.
Right. It's a big bill.
Right. And so I know I just threw like a lot of paint at the wall, but that's what I've seen in 8 years.
Sure.
What do you want to pick
Yeah.
apart?
So, how do you take students who are, in different phases of their development, and it's because it's interesting. I wanted to do this show on disability and with real people, and like how do we take something like a big field like disability and like all these things, and then how does that affect your communication and your sexuality, and how do you like stop these negative behaviors before people start to feel like they're not being heard and then they become abusive, or how do you prevent some of these negative outcomes?
So a lot of it also comes down to the nature of the student. So I got a couple of philosophies when it comes to special education. One of
Sure.
them is that, we talk about the justice system in the United States. I say justice system in quotes
Oh, I know. Yeah.
to describe it.
Justice.
Well, I mean, but you have to have an institution of some sort.
Sure. Yeah.
So we call it
But is there justice? Yeah, I know. That's the joke.
I'm not,
I know.
But so objectively speaking, though, you have a process,
Right.
and the way it works is you go to the justice system to undergo the process of judicial review. You have a car accident, somebody rear ends you, and they want to escape liability. So you take them to small claims and you go through the whole process. At the end, the other person is held accountable. Now, that accountability that people seek is the outcome, and that is not really the justice system. That is a byproduct of the justice system being functional. What is the actual product of the justice system is that people have a mediated process of resolving their issues that doesn't result in some other escalatory form of violence or other. And so when I look at education and the process I underwent to get my credential, we don't have outcomes because that's considered predetermination. It's a premeditated outcome that's illegal because it's an unethical process. In predetermination, you say what the endpoint the student has before really knowing. Now, there are some aspects where I can look at a student, I can say this is clearly a very intellectually impaired student. They're probably not going to go to high school and graduate. They will go to high school for a certificate program. And so that's the issue of inclusivity.
And like learn a trade or something.
Or maybe this is a student who's very impaired, and the big thing that they will learn to do is from their power chair, they will be stocking shelves, or they will be folding clothes, or they will be doing any number of jobs through the Workability Grant, which is a great program. Again, I worked with Trace, and we did all of our work vocational training through the Workability Grant. It was a phenomenal program. It's in the state of California. Great. I cannot say enough about the Trace people, Transitional Resources for Adult Community Engagement. Worked with them for the better part of 7 years. And then, I cannot say enough about how positive it is to have those vocational placements for those students, because it gives them the ability to develop skills and gives them a purpose to what it is they're doing.
Sure.
So you'll look at a student, you'll say, okay, we can tell that you're not going to have the diploma. You're going to be certificate track. You're going to go to a program like Trace. You're going to do something like Workability. And that's not really predetermination. That's more like meeting the student's needs and coming up with an appropriate educational placement, known as LRE, least restrictive environment. And that's mandated as part of free appropriate public education. So this is all about respecting the rights of the student, the autonomy of the student, their human dignity, and their intrinsic worth. And so these are students who have diminished autonomy, which is something that they describe in the Belmont Report. It was a byproduct of the Holocaust, was the Belmont Report when they did the Nuremberg trials. And so the Belmont Report determines the nature of diminished autonomy and respect for persons with diminished autonomy. And so when it comes to predetermination, instead of respecting their autonomy, even if it's diminished, you are interpreting the situation, and you are, in a sense, prescribing or diagnosing something. And so in our field, we do not prescribe, we do not diagnose, we assess. And so these are kind of like philosophical lines that I'm outlining. I'm kind of going through a lot of philosophical background, but this is the justification for special education, because this sets the boundaries for the process that you determine the outcome. Now, if you go through that process, that mediated process, do not have a fixed outcome, but you do have an individual outcome for that student. So to each individual, according to their individual abilities and to their individual potential. It's not a maximal outcome, but it is an outcome that guarantees some growth. Some people argue the term diminish. Some people are very cynical about that term. It's used in education, diminish, education to the minimum. But we try to find what's going to work for them.
Right.
So now, with all that kind of red tape out of the way, and I know that that's a lot, when you have a student who's intellectually impaired, you begin the conversation with where you think they are. If you have a student who's Downs, they're going to operate very differently than a student who's autistic.
Mm.
And a student who's autistic is going to operate very differently from someone who has global delays. And global delays are beyond just Downs. I've had students who.
So you're saying that they're slow in a particular way?
Well, that's more like Downs. Typical slowness is what we would associate with Down syndrome. But when I talk about globalized delays, I'm talking about someone with the cognitive function of anywhere between 6 months to 2 years. So 6 to 24 months. But this person might be 19 or 20 when they come to me. And so for them, sex education manifests as, can they possibly use a toilet?
Oh.
And so that's like something that people don't really realize, that I've taught toileting to students. But if you have a student who's autistic, sex education may then include a full spectrum of, as you talk about, what is consent, what is their identity, what it is they're attracted to, what it is they are curious about, learning obviously about the biological aspects, learning the cultural aspects of time and place, how to approach people.
Right.
If they're a man, it's going to be extremely difficult for them because they're autistic and they're going to have issues reading nonverbal behavior.
Right.
How do they approach someone in a manner where they don't come across as violent or aggressive when they just innately have a sort of mental blindness to that perception?
Right. Because you're not reading social cues when you're autistic. You have some inability to kind of see like people's like nonverbal cues, I suppose.
And like, it's also difficult because not only do they have those issues with the cues, but you have to kind of like teach them cues. And then what that means is you have to boil down social cues to a template.
Right. So they can read them.
Right. But then people get angry about that because they're like, oh, you're oversimplifying things. But you're like, well, this kid can't function outside of that at the present moment. But if we teach them this basic template, they might actually be able to
accomplish communication
with more nuance.
Right.
And that's the thing that's so difficult is, again, you don't want to get into predetermination. You want to let the kid show you where it is they can go. They're steering the ship and all you're doing is controlling the throttle. Like they steer the ship, but you're not letting them go too fast where they can wreck.
Right.
And if they are going to wreck, you can back up.
Right.
And and so that is kind of what I talk about when I say there's a mediated process. One group determines the conversation. The other group dictates when it happens. You might have this conversation with a typically developing kid starting around 14 at the beginning of high school. They start to introduce it in the state of California. The first year you can legally teach sex ed is the 5th grade. But I obviously you don't really go on the deep end on the
Sure, you don't want to. You want to give people enough place to answer, ask any questions that they have, but you don't want to go off the deep end when it's too early. We're talking about age appropriate sex education, right? And you're trying to let the person who's younger, ask the questions rather than steer.
Yeah. And that's where you usually you start with the biology at that time.
Right.
You don't talk about the emotional, social, cultural stuff really until high school. And like I said with the South Park joke, they ask Chef, when's the appropriate time to have a conversation? And he says age 17.
Right.
And I really stand by that because when you're 17, you're on the cusp of being able to give consent.
Right.
That's maybe when you have a really more of a deeper end conversation. And, R-rated movies, you got to be 17 to see them.
Right.
And so that all kind of coincides. I think that's the number our culture has really decided on.
Right.
For better or for worse.
Children. Yeah, I know. I love Chef. But,
well,
yeah.
No. You got to do that. You got to do your Chef.
Yeah, well, children.
Okay, that made my day.
Yeah. So
Isaac Hayes.
I just imagine, how do you know, I mean, where do people, I mean, obviously, I think, as young people, there's a lot of like parental controls. And of course, in the Bay Area, I'm sure people are a little bit more liberal, but I'm sure there are plenty of conservative people everywhere, and how do you let people choose what they think is appropriate for their children? And, how do you let kids feel into what's appropriate, what they want to learn about?
Well, there's a lot of irony to that. I mentioned to you in the car the Moby Dick story.
Yes, that was terrible.
I was in high school with this young girl who was Mormon,
Mm.
and her family banned her from taking the sex ed classes, so they made her read Moby Dick. And
Which is really deeply uh, has a lot of violence and just not good outcomes.
no, yeah, I mean, for starters, like, they're Mormon, and the book has a lot of, for lack of a better term, homosexual themes.
Yeah.
And you're like, you're a religious group and you're oriented against that. Like, so I think that a lot of the folks in that example, it's a very obvious kind of cartoony example, but it's a real one from my life. A lot of the folks end up doing more harm than help, trying to suppress it.
Right.
I think that the cat's out of the bag, and so the best approach is, again, the mediated process of what are the conversations that need to happen. You make a list of all the topics that you think need to be addressed,
Yeah.
and then you have the other group that's more conservative dictate when they feel comfortable having them.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they say, well, you can't have those conversations ever, then that's
Right.
the person who's unreasonable.
Right.
Because in a mediated process, it's a two-party system at least, where people
Right.
are negotiating. Um, and, and so, like, it's one of those things where you don't want to piss off the parents. I don't like some of the recent legislation, which I think infringes on the parents' rights.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of legislation about trans rights. I'm very skeptical about trans rights in a high school environment because they are not of the age of consent. They are not autonomous. And as much as I would like to respect those identities, which I do, I think that the trans identity is legitimate. I'm not saying it isn't, but I think that in that environment, they are causing a lot of harm, particularly for themselves, when they say that if a student identifies as trans, they won't forward that information to the parents. If you have a student who identifies as being suicidal, you mention that to the parents. If the student talks about having unprotected sex, you have to disclose that to the parents. If the student is using drugs, you have to disclose that to the parents. If the student is engaged in violent behavior, or is engaged in vandalism, or is engaged in theft, exorbitant amounts of theft,
Mm.
you have to report that to the parents. So I think that the better answer is, if you want to actually protect the rights of those students, if you have an authentically trans person in front of you, and they are truly authentically trans, I do believe they have their rights to their identity. I do believe that. But if you want to do the best for that person, I think it's in the nuance of the conversation. And I think saying we're not going to talk to the parents is just as bad as the parents saying we're not having the conversation, period, because those are the two polar extremes
Right.
of the paradigm.
Right.
And so what we're seeing is, you can take -10 and +10 and average them out to 0, or you can take -2 and +2 and average them out to 0. And the difference between those is, while the outcome is still 0, the swing in the paradigm is a
It's
much,
so deep and polarized.
whereas the other one is constrained. It's a narrower set of parameters. It's more balanced.
Right.
The attenuation between the extremes is moderate. You don't have people responding in anger. And again, this goes back to what I was saying about young men. If you go up to an angry person and say, "You're angry,"
And yell at them. You're so
you're just going to fucking piss them off more.
not going to help the situation.
Right. And so if you have angry parents saying, "Well, you're a bunch of angry, stupid parents and you don't know what's right for your kids," that's really arrogant and presumptive on the educator's part.
Right.
And if the
And maybe not effective.
Right.
Anyway.
And if the parents are like, "Well, you're an incompetent educator, and who do you think you're?"
Right.
It's, I can use my South Park voice on that. But it's it's the same thing. And so like when I talk about this, it's not just about like sex ed, it's about the emotional awareness, the situational awareness, the self-reflective process, because that to me is all part of it. And we don't really address that in our community, and it's very hard to fill that gap. And I think that if people addressed a bit more of that, I think academic performance would improve.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that that is something that where people are pushing more academics to solve the academic gap. And I don't think that more of the same is going to produce a different result.
Got it. Yeah.
I don't know. Is there something else you want to ask me about?
Well, I want to ask you about your art and also your music because you had an art show here at the studio recently.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So my grandfather, speaking of angry men, he was a Korean War veteran, and for a period of time he was a POW, and he came back from Korea very fucking angry.
Mm.
And he killed people while he was in Korea.
Yeah. Governmentally sanctionedly.
Yes, but he came back with a lot of that.
But he was paid to kill people, so it's not like
he's a soldier. So he came back to the United States and he learned to paint. And so
good.
he was a painter. My grandfather was an oil painter, and that was his way of kind of like rehabilitating himself.
Sure.
So my artistic striving kind of comes from that side of my family. My mother's side of the family is very creative. My grandfather was a painter. He was a fireman. Used to run into buildings, pull people out, save their lives.
Wow.
Very intense, very brave man.
Sure.
Very, very, very intense
but,
man.
Able to deal with lots of danger there.
Yeah, well, I think that he learned how to be of service, and he found his own way of being of service to the community. My whole thing with being an educator is I'm trying to be of service, because for my grandfather, art came as a way to mediate his anger and his frustration with life and society. And for me, kind of the other way around. I started as an artist, but at a young age, my grandfather influenced me. I was like, been drawing since I was like maybe 5, like regularly. I'm 33, so like I've got 28 years of it. And I remember him kind of like teaching me a bit about how to draw. Like he would put his hand on top of mine and help me draw lines. And then he went blind because of all the smoke damage to his eyes. Yeah. And but he went blind, but he was still driving. He was legally blind, but yeah, he would still drive for a while until they finally took his license from him.
Yeah, you can drive with a lot of vision loss.
Yeah, it's kind of a problem.
Not saying it's the best.
No, but yeah, so he was a funny guy. And he used to chain smoke. He was a fireman. He would chain smoke like a chimney.
Wow.
Yeah, Tim Wines.
Terrifying and beautiful, but terrifying. I don't know.
Yeah, life has dents. You just learn to live with it. But
yeah, and tell us more about your art.
So my art came from him. My art is inspired by a lot of negative space.
Sure.
I do a lot of work using negative space and watercolors. And
you also do like heavy metal?
Yeah, so I'm from the death metal scene in San Jose. A lot of friends who made it through that scene and are doing bigger and better things. Guys like Lost to the Void. But my guitar teacher back in the day was Chris Lee. He's kind of a local legend in San Jose. A lot of people came from his school of education and music. He was a lay person, but he's phenomenally taught. And I'm kind of like a lay person myself because I'm not formally taught.
Sure.
So I learned with Chris, I learned with Todd. Death metal is really like just jazz with distortion. It's angry jazz.
I love that description.
Yeah, angry jazz.
Right.
That's
Jazz.
what. Yeah,
Wow.
a lot of people don't realize it's the same
Sure.
chords.
Yeah.
Doesn't follow 251, 36251. It follows its own set of progressions,
Sure.
but it is using the same voicing, 7-chord voicings.
Right.
I play a 7-string guitar. I've been playing 17 years. Learned from Chris, learned from Todd Kimball. Kimball was my jazz teacher.
Sure.
When I studied art, I studied for a year with the legendary Noah Buchanan. Shout out to Noah.
Nice.
Noah is a fellow at the Royal Academy of Scotland or something like that.
Sure.
He's done all kinds of shows. Noah Buchanan, look him up. It will blow your mind the stuff he does.
Sure. And LFG?
LFG is a podcast that's a byproduct of all the stuff that I did in
Yeah.
San Jose. I worked for Metro Newspaper, worked for John Ha, and he was the ad director there. I worked for Dan Lucrano.
Right. And it's your podcast.
Right. And so I learned all of my marketing and production stuff kind of on the business side from them. I learned more about the business from working for Brendan Ward, part of, at the time, Euphoric Styles, no longer around. Brendan is a very interesting guy, manages a lot of big artists. He's working with Diplo right now. So I worked with Brendan for a while, worked with the guys over at Santa Cruz Music Festival, worked for a bunch of other festivals, which I will not name because I had bad terms with those people. And then, you know, I basically just kept going, and it manifested in LFG, and all of the guests that come on there are people that I've met throughout my life. We do journalism with them. It's all about their story, them talking about what it is they do,
Yeah.
what their interests are.
And how can people find you?
You know, I'm the Acid Drip, DRIP, not Acid Trip. So at the Acid Drip on YouTube, Instagram. I got all my art and music there. For LFG, it's LFG Podcast on Instagram and on YouTube. And then, you know, we've got other projects, and I do have an educational YouTube channel where I do reviews of educational materials, and I make my own materials. And that's Lion Sight Services. It's named after my grandfather. Kind of trying to bring honor to the old family name. Yeah, you know, I've been just in this field of art for probably 27 years, but really aggressively producing self-publishing since like 2010, so 14 years. And Amir is my business partner. He helps run LFG. I've known Amir. Shout out to you, douchebag.
That's love.
Yes, in my phone, he's douchebag, and in his phone, I'm asshole.
Aw, love. That's love.
He's my business partner. He's not here right now, but you know, shout out to Amir. And I've known Amir since the 8th grade. So since I was 13. So now it's been 20 years. I've known him 20 goddamn years. Amir, you're only getting uglier as you get older.
Aw, but that's a loving comment. So is there anything that you would like to share with our listeners to help them make their world better?
Yeah, you know, try to stop it and reflect before you respond to someone.
Yeah.
Especially if they're clearly angry or responding in some way with anger. Try to stop and reflect, break the cycle of anger and escalation. I think special education is a weird niche, but I think sex education in various forms belongs to all people. It's just about making it appropriate. There is an
age appropriate.
Yeah, well, developmentally appropriate. Yeah.
Sure.
There is a sex curriculum that is appropriate for every audience. But yeah, I mean, and then, you know, I think that people just need to listen a little bit better to each other and get back to the mediated response and look less for outcomes and more for processes. And if you lean more into the process, you'll actually get to the outcome.
Better outcomes.
Yes. And
because it's a shared process.
And like
It's not just you.
you can't even imagine what the outcome will be if you just
Right.
kind of let it organically develop instead of saying, "Rah,"
Right.
you know.
Trying
So,
to force it into what your ego.
well, yeah, yeah, and that's kind of my take on it. And so like I'm a little bit more laissez-faire, and I've seen the consequences of what happens when you suppress it, because there's outbursts and then people get labeled the wrong way. That happened to me. It happens to my students.
Hmm.
I try to stop it from happening to my students because I've been through it.
Sure.
Um, you know, and I guess that's kind of it. That's my story.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on Sexploration with Monika.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You made it as comfortable as possible.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank
Uh,
you so much.
all right.
You can find Sexploration with Monika on iTunes and have new episodes delivered automatically. Thanks for listening.